Number 10, the Hulk. Now Bruce Banner is the absolute poster child for not being able to control one's powers. If you're not familiar with the immense power this genius possesses, where have you been? Due to exposure to gamma radiation from the gamma bomb that he designed, he now has the ability to turn into the green giant known as the Hulk, with many of the early transformations being involuntary due to anger. Well, he does eventually strike an agreement with the beast within, an excellent example of that being the Hulk-Bruce hybrid we see on screen in Avengers Endgame. It wasn't always smooth sailing. Now, how much control Bruce winds up losing to the Hulk is best described as a spectrum because there are times when he completely loses himself to the Hulk-fueled rage, there are times when he retains his genius intellect, and there are instances of everything in between, really. First appearing in The Incredible Hulk #1 all the way back in 1962, the Hulk is a staple in comic book history, and I really hope one day he just gets a decent standalone movie. Number 9. Black Bolt. Now, the king of the Inhumans is a bit of a tricky one since he does have some control over his powers. He's just severely handicapped by them. Black Bolt's powers come from an organic brain implant that interacts with electrons in the air, and this implant is connected to the speech center of his brain. Now, similar to how Cyclops' powers is activated when he opens his eyes, Black Bolt's ability is activated whenever he speaks, no matter how loud he is, which leaves him effectively mute outside of battle. This has led to some major mishaps for the hero, like the time he accidentally killed his parents with the debris of a Kree ship he destroyed with his voice, or the time he fought Thanos and destroyed Attilan, which led to the release of a Terrigen mist bomb that, combined with the atmosphere, became deadly to mutants everywhere. So, although he does have control over his voice, that doesn't mean that he's able to control the sheer power of his abilities. Check him out in his first appearance, Fantastic Four #45 in 1965. Number 8, Citizen Steel. DC Comics' Nathan Haywood had a promising football career until a severe injury required him to have one of his legs amputated. Following an attack by the Fourth Reich, this was meant to wipe out the entire Haywood bloodline. Nathan was infected by the metal blood that came from one of those foes, and for reasons that were never really explained, Nathan's body absorbed the metal, and in addition to him growing back a new leg, it made him a superhuman. With his newfound super strength and invincibility, Haywood fights crime under the name Citizen Steel. However, there are aspects of his power that are completely out of his control. Because of his steel-like skin, he's completely lost the ability to feel physical touch, which prevents him from gauging temperature or pain, and he can't control how strong he is, and I mean at all. There are times where his footsteps will be so heavy and powerful that the floor will break underneath him. To try and counteract this, he wears a special suit that mitigates his movements, but it can really only do so much. First appearing in Justice Society of America Volume 3 #2 back in 2007, check him out to see how truly strong he can be. Number 7. Scarlet Witch. The twin sister of Pietro Maximoff, Wanda Maximoff has always had trouble keeping her powers under control. With the ability to manipulate and warp reality at will with a force she refers to as chaos magic, which was given to her by High Evolutionary's experimentation and then further amplified by the demon that was imprisoned in Wundagore Mountain, her powers are really easy to lose control of, especially when her emotions are out of control. A 2004 storyline is a great example of this when she discovered that her twin sons weren't real. They were actually just manifestations of her reality-altering chaos magic, and she was unable to accept this and soon became a danger to herself and others, so her memories of the boys were completely wiped from her memory. Years later, she began to remember them, and when she realized what had been done to her, she went completely mad with grief. Her nervous breakdown gave way to a full-on war waged against the Avengers that resulted in several deaths, and the team's complete upheaval, and all the destruction and death came from her tampering with the fabric of reality. Later on, she causes M-Day, the depowering of the mutant race that nearly caused their extinction. Moral of the story? You really don't want to get on her bad side because you have no idea what she's gonna do. Check her out for yourself on the big screen in all the Avengers movies, or in her first appearance, 1964's X-Men #4. Number 6. Ghost Rider. Don't worry, I won't be referencing the movie starring Nicolas Cage as Johnny Blaze because if you sat through them like I did, I think you've suffered enough. Now, Ghost Rider's powers come from his black magic bond to the demon Zarathos, and he's always been a thorn in Johnny's side for decades. Thanks to this connection, Blaze gained the ability to transform into Ghost Rider, who possesses a vast array of powers ranging from hellfire manipulation to superhuman stamina. Similar to Bruce Banner, Blaze had very little influence on Rider's actions in the beginning, succumbing to Zarathos' control anytime evil presented itself. Over time, he gradually gained more control over his alter ego, using his powers to not only vanquish baddies, but to protect the innocent. Zarathos resurfaced several times over the years with various schemes to regain control of Johnny Blaze's physical body. At times, he's been successful, causing Blaze to once again lose himself to the Rider, but usually Blaze manages to come out on top and regain control. Take a look at his first appearance all the way back in 1972 in Marvel Spotlight #5. Number 5. New 52 Superman. We all know our Prime Earth's Clark Kent. So let's take a look at another version of the superhero that didn't stick around for too long. Now, possessing many of the same powers, there are many things that led to this demise of this version of Superman. One being the use of a new power he dubbed the Solar Flare. This power released a massive blast from his body, using every last bit of solar energy stored in his cells. The devastating power alone made this ability a very useful one, but it left Clark powerless for 24 hours after each use, because his body needed time to reabsorb the sunlight. After repeated use, Superman found himself less and less super, losing his powers one by one. Fast forward past a few fights and a pretty bad kryptonite infection, and we find Superman needing to use this ability one last time, and it really was the last. Our new 52 Superman is finished off for good, and if it weren't for the pre-new 52 Superman finding his way to this universe, there would have been no one to protect it. Check out the storyline for yourself and let me know in the comments what you think. Number 4. Raven. In the comics, Raven's powers weren't always clearly defined, and neither was her control over them, which is why we'll be focusing on the Raven that we saw in 2003's Teen Titans TV series. Born the daughter of the demon Trigon and the human Orella, Raven was primarily raised by monks and was taught to use her powers and abilities, as well as learn to keep her emotions in check. Now, upon learning that one day she would be used as a key element in her father's eventual takeover of the universe, she ends up fleeing to Earth, hoping to escape the fate where she eventually joins the Teen Titans. In the cartoon, it's clearly stated that her powers are dependent on her emotions, so the reason she acts so cold is to keep her abilities in check. But despite her attempts, Raven is still human, well, half human, I guess, and her emotions get the better of her a few times in the series. In the episode Fear itself, when, after watching a scary movie, Raven's fears were manifested as a real beast that haunted the Titans' towers, and in the episode Switched, we learn of the connection between Raven's powers and her emotions when Starfire, in Raven's body, causes havoc in her chaotic emotions. Now, it really makes sense why Raven meditated so much throughout the series, and man, do I miss that show. If you haven't watched it, please do yourself a favor and find it on the internet. You will not regret it. Number 3. Friendly Fire. Now, little is known about this DC Comics character, other than that he's not the best hero. With the ability to shoot blasts of fire and energy from his hands, you'd think that he would have learned to aim early on, but alas, he seemed to have skipped that step. He was a terrible shot, so he consistently hit his friends and not the villains, making the name Friendly Fire make sense. Once a member of the hero team Section 8, which was basically a big old group of losers. I mean, come on, their members consisted of a guy who carried around a window to throw at people and another guy who welded dead dogs to villains. He kind of looked like a superstar compared to those guys. His final adventure was probably the worst out of all of them because instead of hitting the villain with his powers, he ends up blowing his own head. Check out this tragic yet hilarious story for yourself in 1997's Hitman number 18. Number 2. Franklin Richards. Known as Powerhouse, Franklin Richards is the son of Reed and Susan Richards, and we've all learned by now, being the child of two mutants usually leads to some crazy strong powers that are impossible to control. Considered an Omega level mutant, Richards possesses a ridiculous number of powers, which earned him the title of the most powerful mutant ever born. Because Franklin's powers manifested at a young age rather than during puberty, as with most mutants, his control over his abilities wasn't always that great. In fact, Franklin once defeated Ultron when he accidentally released a wave of psionic energy as a result of Ultron's radiation. He also once resurrected Galactus, created a villain known as Modulus when he felt jealous of his newborn sister, and even transformed Ben Grimm back into the Thing to rescue him from an Asgardian warrior. This kid is truly not someone you want to mess with. Why not check out his story for yourself through his first appearance in 1968's Fantastic Four Annual number 6. And number 1. So many of the X-Men. Now, this one had to be combined into one point because my goodness, there are so many X-Men who have trouble controlling their powers. Here, let me give you a few examples. Cyclops can't control his optic blast without the help of his specifically made visor. Beast keeps mutating into various furry forms. Wolverine's lost his healing factor countless times and has even died because of it. If Rogue touches anyone, she involuntarily takes their powers and even their lives if the connection isn't prolonged. Meryl once lost the ability to control her excessive bone growth. Hot-headed Chamber has basically no lower jaw or much of a neck thanks to the energy blasts that emanate from his head, and Legion barely has any control over any of his abilities. Now, obviously this all makes sense since the nature of a mutation would obviously have its drawbacks, but seriously, when you list it all like this, it seems a little bit excessive.
Number 10. Gambit. Remy LeBeau is a powerful and popular member of the X-Men, with the ability to tap into an item's potential kinetic energy, making it a dangerous and explosive weapon. He often uses smaller items, like a deck of playing cards, which he will then throw at his enemies. The only real limit on these powers is that he needs to make direct skin contact with whatever item he's charging, hence the cool fingerless gloves, and the amount of time it takes him to charge the object, with larger objects taking longer. He also has the ability to hypnotically charm people, making them more likely to do what he wants. Before he was a member of the X-Men though, he was a master thief, but he found that he was having trouble controlling his powers, and was worried that he might potentially harm other people. This caused him to seek out the help of Mr. Sinister, who gave Gambit a surgery, removing part of his brain in order to dampen his powers and make them more manageable. Number 9. Captain Atom. Captain Atom was originally a Charlton Comics character, the same way that the Blue Beetle used to be. DC Comics eventually purchased Charlton's collection of heroes, and as a result, he was introduced into the DC universe. In the DC retelling of his origin, Nathaniel Atom was a man sentenced to death for treason. He was offered the opportunity to instead sign up for an experiment designed to test the structural integrity of an alien metal. To test this, they placed Atom in a metal cage and then blasted it with a nuclear explosion. He was vaporized, but much like the Watchmen character he inspired, Dr. Manhattan, he was reformed with the metal now covering his skin. Captain Atom can tap into the quantum field and convert the energy into powerful blasts. He can also generate and manipulate matter, such as when he transformed Green Arrow's arrows into butterflies. Captain Atom has to be very careful with his powers though, as he is essentially a walking nuke. When he uses his upper power levels, he will start to leak radiation, and if his metal skin is ruptured, he risks detonating like an atomic bomb and destroying whatever city he's in. Number 8. Radius. Jared Corbo is a mutant who was raised with his half-brother Adrian in the East Ontario town of Orlew, at an orphanage called Hull House, or as the orphans nicknamed it, Hell House. Unbeknownst to most of the residents, Hull House was actually being operated by the Canadian superhero agency known as Department H, as a way to find and recruit members for their various superhero teams, such as Alpha Flight. Sometimes they waited until the orphans were of age, and sometimes they would have them adopted by the department so that they could participate while being underage. Which sounds bad, but when you think about it, isn't that different from what Professor X is doing. Jared's mutant powers allow him to create a force field, which he is incapable of shutting off. While this protects him from harm, it also means that he can't touch or be touched by others, and is even unable to effectively shower, and can't eat without wearing a special eating filter which converts the food to a form that can get through the field, allowing Jared to get the necessary nutrients he needs to survive. Number 7. Iska the Unbeaten. Iska is thousands of years old and is the sister of Genesis, who is the wife of Apocalypse. She is a hardened warrior who respects power and strength, like the other mutants of Arakko, and her powers reflect this. Iska's power is tychokinesis, which is the power over luck and probability, but specifically, her power means that she cannot lose, or the better way to say it is that she always wins. This includes one-on-one contests, votes, and wagers, but also larger battles where she is a member of a team or army. In contests of skill, her power, including some limited shape-shifting, gives her the talents she needs to win, or she might just win through improbable circumstances. So far it sounds pretty good. Always winning is so good it just sounds like ridiculous and lazy writing. But it also means that in larger battles or wars, her powers weigh the probability of the two sides and make her defect from the losing side and join the winning side, even if the losing side was composed of those she truly cared about. Meaning that even though she still technically won, she betrayed her closest friends and allies. So she has a great power, but no control at all on how it manifests. Number 6. Black Bolt. Blackagar Boltigan made his first appearance in Fantastic Four number 45. He is the Inhuman King, who when exposed to the mutagenic Terrigen Mist was granted power of an incredible level, even for an Inhuman. His power comes from his voice, with even the smallest whisper being capable of rocking a battleship. This power was discovered when he was just a baby, and in order to protect his community, he was kept away from society until he was 19, in order for him to try and learn to control his powers. When finally let into society, he saw a Kree warship which he brought down with his voice. Unfortunately, the ship landed on the local government officials, including his parents, and he accidentally became the leader of the Inhumans at age 20. He is really good at not speaking now, as he knows all too well how little control he has over his powers and their effects on others. Number 5. Radioactive Man. Not to be confused with the Simpsons superhero whose goggles do nothing, or with the DC Comics villain, we are talking about the Marvel hero known as Radioactive Man. Making his debut in Journey into Mystery #3 in 1963, Chen Lu is a nuclear physicist who exposed himself to small amounts of radiation at a time until he was able to build up a powerful immunity to it, as well as the ability to manipulate it to his benefit. However, he is unable to stop being radioactive, and therefore he can't be around anyone without giving them radiation sickness. He's able to mitigate this to an extent with the use of a containment suit. But this only works for a limited amount of time. This was a constant issue for the character, but later issues later retconned his abilities so he was able to have greater control of his powers, allowing him to not give all of his friends cancer. Number 4. Rogue. Anna Marie first appeared in Avengers Annual #10. She was raised in a hippie commune in Mississippi with her close friend Cody Robbins. One day, Cody decided that it was time to shoot his shot with Anna Marie. Proving that the whole "the worst she could do is say no" thing is a bit inaccurate, when Cody and Anna made direct skin contact, her mutant powers drained him of his life force, leaving him in a permanent coma. She eventually found a way to make this power work for good when she joined the X-Men, and she got more powers once she made contact with Carol Danvers. But overall, Rogue is unable to control her draining powers and is forced to wear gloves at all times in order to avoid making direct contact with anyone who she could accidentally hurt. Number 3. Friendly Fire. Friendly Fire is a member of Section 8 who has the ability to shoot powerful energy blasts out of his hands that deal devastating damage. Unfortunately, as his name suggests, he is totally incapable of hitting what he is aiming at, and instead always ends up hitting his teammates. This has led to a couple of deaths of Section 8 members, but the worst death has got to be the one that occurred when the team went up against the mini-angled ones. These strange visitors attacked the team, easily dispatching team members like Jean de Baton Baton and Dog Welder. Friendly Fire realized that it was up to him, and he had to come through for his friends. As he put it, "I gotta do it. Just this once. Gotta hit what I'm aiming at. Can't let my buddies down. Must hold the power." He unleashed the full force of his blast and blew his own head off, barely being able to utter the word crap before dying. Number 2. Infectious Lass. First appearing in Superboy #201, Drura Sept from the planet Somatur is part of an alien race whose bodies play host to a variety of different microorganisms. The people of her planet are able to play host to these bacteria without suffering any ill effects, but they were able to infect the people around her. This sounds like it could have some potential for a superhero power, the ability to unleash germ warfare on your enemies. But unfortunately, Infectious Lass is unable to control who she infects, and is just as likely to infect any of her allies as she is her enemies. She tried out for the Legion of Superheroes, but was denied membership as she was deemed more of a risk to the Legion members than an asset. Number 1. The Hulk. When Bruce Banner was accidentally caught in the blast radius of his experimental gamma bomb, he underwent a startling metamorphosis. Whenever he becomes angry or outraged, he transforms into the Hulk. The Hulk is of course a giant green rage monster who is prone to going on rampages and smashing things. Hulk is viewed as a monster by society, and by extension, so is Banner. Banner has to make constant efforts to control the beast within, but since it would be a boring comic if the Hulk never came out, Bruce constantly loses control and unleashes the Incredible Hulk onto the world.
Number 10. Dr. Fate. So here's the thing with Dr. Fate. Typically the character is not just one character, but two inhabiting one body. This is what the Helm of Fate actually represents, the connection of Dr. Fate to Naboo, the Lord of Order, which is where Kent Nelson originally got his powers and his knowledge from. Of course, Kent Nelson also has powers power separate from his appearance as Dr. Fate. He is, after all, a supremely skilled and knowledgeable magic user in his own right, thanks to years of training. However, with Dr. Fate really in essence being kinda two people combined, the Lord of Order Naboo and Naboo's host, in this case we're talking about Kent Nelson, these two do not always agree on how best to deal with an enemy or potentially catastrophic events. Case in point in Justice League Dark, when Naboo takes control of Kent's body against his will, only for him to later be freed of Naboo's influence and refuse to basically use the power of the helm, instead choosing to keep Naboo trapped within it, because Kent knows, well, if I try to work with Naboo, I'm probably gonna get possessed again. This guy's kinda being a little evil right now. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe? I know there are many of you that are not subscribed, so do it. Click the button. Do it. Number 9. Cyborg. In the Doom Patrol series, we literally saw just how powerful Cyborg is when it comes to using him as a pawn and manipulating him into attacking his own father. Mr. Nobody managed to trick Cyborg and ended up showing just how much potential he has when it comes to his ability to do harm. Cyborg actually would make probably a pretty great villain, to be honest, which is creepy. Cyborg in general usually has to be careful when fighting against enemies because he is super strong. In the comics and other media, he has also been portrayed as being in essence a master hacker, and as a result constantly decides to hold back rather than, just use his hacking skills to manipulate the world, which would kind of be, and sometimes that would be a little insidious. In the Snyder Cut, it's even alluded to that Cyborg is actually one of the most powerful people in the Justice League, with him being able to control all the banks and bank accounts of the world if he wanted. That's just part of what we get to see. Here he is shown as pretty much having access to everything technological, but being someone who chooses to use this power reluctantly and responsibly, because he is a hero. Honestly, when it comes to powerhouses in the comics who are capable of doing more, but choose to hold back, knowing that unleashing the full force of their power could be pretty dangerous, Cyborg is actually one of the best examples, even though some might not fully comprehend or accept him as the powerhouse he is. But Vic definitely deserves that. Number 8. Sunspot. Sunspot is one of my favorite heroes when it comes to those who have to hold their power back. I mean, at one point, his power was at risk of killing him, guys. After being shot in the head, he was forced to wear a headband to help regulate his powers, as he lost control of them, somewhat, and left unchecked they could easily kill him. Sunspot's headband would regulate his powers, thereby protecting Roberto da Costa from being burned up from the inside out by literally holding back and balancing his powers for him. And we see just how necessary this is when Bobby, who at the time was known as Citizen V, decides to throw caution to the wind, removing his regulator headband to prove that he is indeed one of the most powerful mutants to have ever existed, while also obviously fighting to save the world by using his power to keep the world engine running, putting his life on the line. Number 7. Sentry. EJ Graham in the comments for the part 1 of this video was considering suggesting Sentry for a potential part 2. Ultimately though, he decided against suggesting that perhaps Sentry doesn't hold back, and instead often simply gets written out of Marvel Comics because he's too overpowered. I would argue that him both being written out / killed off because he's too powerful, and him having to hold back because he is too powerful, are actually both true. Sentry does every now and then go in guns a-blazing, with him ripping people in half kind of becoming a weird, every so often semi-regular occurrence. However, I will also say that more often than not, we've actually seen Sentry hold back his powers and express restraint, especially when you consider he agreed to wipe his own mind and the minds of everyone else on Earth of his superheroic existence just to protect them from the evil villain, the Void, who is basically Sentry's villainous alter ego he was made to believe that he'd always had after being brainwashed by Mastermind. Number 6. Wonder Woman. We have seen what happens when Wonder Woman stops holding back, and it's not pretty, I'm gonna tell you that. Whether we are talking about emotionally with her giving into a well of despair, or physically with her causing the mass destruction of the entire planet as a result of a fight against Superman. In Tales from the Dark Multiverse, War of the Gods, her giving in emotionally resulted in her being overtaken by Hecate, who she had previously trapped in her subconscious, initially preventing Hecate from possessing her. However, after the destruction of Themyscira and the death of her sisters, her fellow Amazons, and her mother, Diana ends up losing hope, and thereby loses control over herself. In Wonder Woman Dead Earth, we learn of how Wonder Woman giving into her rage and removing her bracelets, which in this story hold back Diana's power, results in the destruction of the planet. Even in the main continuity, it's actually been suggested that Diana is much more powerful than she lets on, and this is likely because without holding back, she could actually cause major damage and destruction to the world around her and people in it. Number 5. Storm. Storm has demonstrated restraint on multiple occasions when facing her enemies, and has proven time and time again how much of a badass she is in the comics. Recently, during the AXE Judgment Day event, Storm was one of the few people to survive Uranos' initial attack on planet Arakko, formerly known as Mars. This went down when Storm was the acting regent of Arakko, the planet and nation's leader. Storm is the only person I believe to have actually sat on both the Great Ring of Arakko and the Quiet Council of Krakoa at the same time, and she made this work for actually a pretty good while. In order to get her seat, she actually had to defeat the previous regent who held the seat of All Around Us, that's the name of the seat that she holds, Nameless, the shapeshifter queen. While Storm bested Nameless, she refused to kill her opponent, preferring to hold back and allow Nameless to live, forcing Nameless to actually curse Storm and choose to take their own life rather than simply admitting defeat. Number 4. Black Bolt. Black Bolt is a character who is so powerful, half the time just the threat of him using his power is enough to stop those who oppose him from basically messing with him. Black Bolt's power first manifested at birth, as his mother and father exposed him to Terrigenesis before he was even born as part of an experiment to see, kind of what that would do. This, along with his immensely powerful genetic makeup, resulted in him being born as one of the most powerful Inhumans ever. Black Bolt would end up being kept in isolation for most of his childhood and early life as a result of the sheer power that he possessed. He literally couldn't even just run around and be a kid. No, too powerful. His powers are related to the speech center of his brain and his ability to harness electrons. Using both, he possesses an extremely powerful voice, with just a whisper often being enough to harm those who stand against him. As it stands, Black Bolt usually communicates telepathically, although not psionic himself, or more often with his own specific form of sign language. Number 3. Icon. Icon has been shown to be even more powerful than Superman on occasion, with Superman at one point remarking that being hit by Icon was the hardest that he'd ever been hit. The two have fought multiple times against one another in the comics, even way back when Clark had his long hair. Oh, I miss his long, luscious locks. At one point they end up fighting in the 2006 Justice League of America series in issue 28, but here it's all a show. So there's no real victor since they are kind of just pretending to fight here. And we have to expect that Icon was holding back somewhat here. Sure, he wanted to make the fight appear convincing, but he didn't actually intend to hurt Superman, which implies that he wasn't even using his full force here, as he likely wouldn't need to go hard to sell a fight to onlookers. With that reasoning, not only have we literally seen Icon hold back, but it also means that the hero, now from DC's Milestone imprint, might actually have to hold back even more than some of the most powerful heroes from DC's mainline, which is pretty wild to consider. Number 2. Magik. Magik is a hero that often gets left out of lists like this, so I want to thank Michael Sheehan in the comments from our part 1 video for suggesting that I add her to this video. Truly, she is a superhero who constantly has to hold back, lest she threaten the existence of the world and possibly the universe. Magik isn't just a straight up hero, she's complicated. She also has a darker side known as Darkchild that she often has to keep contained. And that's what I love about her complexity. She also has a ton of trauma in her life that she constantly has to confront and deal with. Number 1. Dr. Manhattan. Dr. Manhattan has to be one of the ultimate heroes for needing to hold back. Dr. Manhattan is insanely powerful, and perhaps this is why he generally prefers to stay out of the affairs of mortal beings. Well, that and the fact that he likely doesn't much care for, humans. He is a reality warper, and in fact is one of the folks, I would argue, in current lore the main folk, responsible for the New 52 continuity reset. As such, Dr. Manhattan constantly holds back, despite the fact that he could reset the universe on the daily, destroy it, or completely fix everything. Instead of doing any of this stuff though, he prefers to take more of a watcher role, only getting involved when he really feels it's necessary or has some strong desire to do so, which isn't very often.
Number 10. Daredevil. When Matt Murdock was a child, he was hit by a truck that was carrying toxic radioactive isotopes. He got some gunk in his eyes, and as a result, he was blinded. But this being Marvel Comics, the radiation heightened his other senses to the point that he was given his trademark radar sense, which allows him to do sick flips and fight crime as Daredevil. Daredevil is quite a religious fellow who also believes in letting the legal system do its work as much as possible, so he has a pretty strict stance against killing people, believing that the criminals he fights should be taken to prison and left alive. This has put him at odds with other more lethal characters like the Punisher, who thinks that the only good criminal is a dead criminal. But despite the fact that he is often tempted, Daredevil holds back, using his ninja skills to brutalize and maim, but not to kill. This self-imposed rule has been broken a couple times, such as when he was possessed by a demon, when he was forced to shoot a helicopter pilot who was using a minigun to brutalize Hell's Kitchen, and when he attempted to shoot the Punisher, when Frank had tied him up and taped a gun to his hand. But once again, these are pretty extreme situations where he didn't really have any other options. Number 9, Professor X. Charles Xavier is the leader of the X-Men and the founder of a school for gifted youngsters where he trains young mutants to control their powers so that they don't accidentally destroy buildings on the regular. He is an extremely powerful mutant, being able to read and control people's minds. In theory, he could force anyone to do pretty much anything he wants. Thankfully, Xavier shows a decent amount of restraint with his powers, and usually makes a point of not reading his students' minds without permission, and rarely using them to make people act against their nature. For example, considering that governments in the Marvel Universe are consistently passing anti-mutant legislation, it would be very tempting to control the responsible politicians' minds to force them not to vote for such measures. But he doesn't do stuff like that. Sure, he has a bit of a god complex, and has a history of wiping people's minds when he screws up, or dampening Jean Grey's powers until he feels she's ready for them. But overall, he shows a lot of restraint. Outside the comics, in the X-Men 2 movie, we even see that while using Cerebro, Professor X could kill every mutant or human in existence simply by concentrating. So, yeah, he's holding back. Number 8, Batman. Batman is similar to Daredevil in the regard that he is one of the most gifted martial artists in the world and has extensive knowledge on how to handle any situation. Like Daredevil, he also has a strict moral code that prevents him from killing any of the criminals he faces, despite the fact that he certainly could with ease. For example, in Book 1 of The Dark Knight Returns, Batman is fighting against a group of thugs, and in his inner monologue, we can see him playing out strategies, saying, "There are 7 working defenses from this position. 3 of them disarm with minimal contact. 3 of them kill, and the other hurts." He, of course, chooses the option that hurts. But it is a good example of how, as a master strategist, in any situation, he is aware of how he could kill, but chooses not to. This is due to him not wanting to go down the path of his villains, and having a desire to see criminals reform, often hiring criminals who are let out of prison to work at Wayne Enterprises. So, like Daredevil, he has a strict moral code, but he is better than Daredevil at sticking to it, earning him the higher slot. Number 7, Thor. Thor is literally the god of thunder. He can bring down lightning, he can smash stuff with his hammer, and he is an amazing warrior with centuries of combat experience. In fact, he was so powerful and arrogant that his father, Odin, sent him to Earth in order to temper his power with humility. For those only familiar with movie Thor, in the comics, Odin sent Thor to Earth with no memories of his life as a god, and made him believe that he was a doctor with a bum leg named Donald Blake. As detailed in the character's first appearance in Journey into Mystery number 83, he spent a decade on Earth learning the value of hard work and perseverance as he dealt with his injured leg and set up his own medical practice. After this decade had passed, Odin implanted a message in Thor's subconscious telling him to go to Norway, where he found his hammer and regained his godly identity. I don't know if this is full-on holding his power back, but the fact that he went through all of that to learn humility and what it meant to be worthy of his powers shows that Thor is very aware of his powers and the proper way to use them. Number 6, Quake. Daisy Johnson is the daughter of the villain Mr. Hyde and a woman with the Inhuman gene. This resulted in her developing the ability to manipulate vibrations. She can use these for a variety of purposes, like causing earthquakes, hence the name Quake. She can also use these powers on a more micro level, such as when she took on the Omega-level mutant Magneto and managed to vibrate his brain until he fell unconscious in New Avengers number 20. On another occasion, when Wolverine was having one of his famous temper tantrums and attacked Nick Fury, she was able to use her vibration powers to cause his heart to explode. So she has the power to take on some of the most notoriously dangerous characters in the Marvel Universe. In fact, she is so powerful that she actually needs to be really careful about how she uses her powers. Obviously, earthquakes can cause a huge amount of collateral damage, so she needs to be careful of that. But the best example of these powers left unchecked is from the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. television show, where Glenn Talbot gets Quake's powers in an alternate timeline and uses them to destroy the planet. So yeah, she needs to be careful. Number 5, Gambit. Remy LeBeau is a powerful and popular member of the X-Men with the ability to tap into an item's potential kinetic energy, making it a dangerous and explosive weapon. He most often uses smaller items like a deck of playing cards, which he will then throw at his enemies. The only real limit on these powers is that he needs to make direct skin contact with whatever item he's charging, hence the cool fingerless gloves. Oh, and also the amount of time it takes him to charge the object, with larger objects taking longer. He also has the ability to hypnotically charm people, making them more likely to do what he wants. Before he was a member of the X-Men, he was a master thief, but found that he was having trouble controlling his powers, causing him to seek out the help of Mr. Sinister, who gave Gambit a surgery removing part of his brain in order to dampen his powers and make them more manageable. So, while there may be other heroes on this list who are more powerful, none of them took such extreme measures to hold themselves back for the safety of others. Number 4, Northstar.
Oh, Andrew, you talk about Alpha Flight on almost every list. Why don't you talk about more popular teams?
Well, I'll tell you, it's because they're awesome. And because I spent a lot of money collecting every appearance of Alpha Flight over the pandemic, including the issue in Volume 2 that features the first appearance of Big Hero 6, which was a real pain in the butt to find. And talking about them in a work video makes that a tax write-off. Plus, it's my list, and you're literally in my home right now, so I'm gonna talk about who I want to talk about. Jean-Paul Beaulier is the fastest mutant in the Marvel Universe, since Quicksilver isn't a mutant anymore. Northstar is capable of reaching incredible speeds when running or flying. He has a twin sister named Aurora, who is also fast and able to fly, but though she has a greater endurance than her brother, he is the faster of the two. In X Factor Volume 4, Number 7, Northstar and fellow speedster Tommy Shepard are comparing top speeds, and JP reveals that his top speed is 189,299 miles per second, which makes him faster than the speed of light. But he has a very good reason for not reaching his full speed. As he explains to Tommy, that would destroy everything in my path. I could garrote the world in half with one lap if I wished it. It would destroy me physically, I mean, not emotionally. I can't breathe at that point because I've created a vacuum and my organs are getting crushed, my bones pulverized into dust. So yeah, Northstar is holding back for good reason. Number 3, Captain Atom. Captain Atom was originally a Charlton Comics character, the same way that Shazam used to be. DC Comics eventually purchased Charlton's collection of heroes, and as a result, he was introduced into the DC universe. In the DC retelling of his origin, Nathaniel Atom was a man sentenced to death for treason. He was offered the opportunity to instead sign up for an experiment designed to test the structural integrity of an alien metal. To test this, they placed Atom in a metal egg and then blasted it with a nuclear explosion. He was vaporized, but much like the Watchmen character he inspired, Dr. Manhattan, he was reconstituted with the metal now covering his skin. Captain Atom can tap into the quantum field and convert the energy into powerful blasts. He can also generate and manipulate matter, such as when he transformed Green Arrow's arrows into butterflies. Captain Atom has to be very careful with his powers, as he is essentially a walking nuke. When he uses his upper power levels, he will start to leak radiation, and if his metal skin is ruptured, he risks detonating like an atomic bomb and destroying whatever city he's in. Number 2, Scarlet Witch. So, Scarlet Witch is one of the most crazy powerful people in the Marvel Universe. One time, she was able to rewrite reality so that mutants were the dominant species on the planet and humans the minority. When Magneto ticked her off, she decided to rewrite reality again, taking away something like 99% of the world's mutant powers by simply saying, no more mutants. She could do that again anytime she wants. I really don't think I need to say anything else on the subject. Number 1, Spider-Man.
When I was checking out the previous 2 videos that Amanda did on this subject, which you should of course check out because they're great and also not filmed in an apartment, but I was shocked to learn that Spider-Man didn't make the cut on either installment. So even though he may not be holding back as much as some of the others on this list, I decided to give him the top spot here. Spider-Man is a powerful hero, being able to climb walls, swing from webs, and use his spider sense to avoid danger. But what we're talking about here is his super strength. He can lift several tons at once, as he infamously did in Amazing Spider-Man number 33, when Dr. Octopus trapped him under loads of heavy machinery. But when you have that level of strength, and also have a rule against killing, you have to make sure you pull your punches to avoid taking someone's head off. This was discovered by Doc Ock when he took over Spider-Man's body and became the superior Spider-Man. In one of his first adventures as the new Spidey, Ock fought the Scorpion, and when he punched the Scorpion in the jaw flew clean off. As Doc put it, never knew this body held so much power. All these years, Parker must have been holding back. That really must have made him rethink every time Spider-Man punched him and how that could have turned out.
Number 10, the Spectre. This spirit of vengeance in the DC universe first appeared in More Fun Comics number 52. He was originally a demon named Aztar who was helping Lucifer to try and take control of heaven. He eventually had a change of heart and surrendered to the Archangel Michael. As a means of atonement, his memory and consciousness were wiped and he was transformed into the Spectre. He is a divinely powered being capable of almost anything he can imagine. He can travel between dimensions and can shoot energy blasts, is immortal and capable of flight, intangibility, possession, telepathy, and telekinesis, just to name a few of his powers. In order to temper this power, he must be bonded to a human host, with his most often host being Jim Corrigan. Spectre has no limit to his power, but is bound by the morality of his host, who often prevents him from unleashing the full wrath of God upon his enemies. Number 9, Green Lantern. The Green Lantern Corps are a group of intergalactic space cops who are led by a group of aliens known as the Guardians of the Universe. They have used the green power of will to create a central power battery on the planet Oa, and to create power rings which recruit members to the Corps and allow them to protect their sectors by creating constructs of anything the wearer can imagine. One of the most powerful and famous Green Lanterns is Hal Jordan, who has created a lot of amazing constructs over the years. When his home, Coast City, was destroyed, Hal showed just how powerful the Green Lantern ring really was by using it to create constructs of the destroyed city and everyone in it for him to interact with when he mourned. However, when he did this, he was breaking the rules established by the Guardians, who forbid the use of the ring for personal gain. The Guardians immediately told him to report to Oa for disciplinary action, but Hal went nuts and went to war with the Green Lanterns. However, it is still a good example of how the power ring is potentially unlimited, but using its full power in an undesignated way can result in the ring being taken away by the Guardians, which I think makes this point apply to all of the various members of the Green Lantern Corps. Number 8, Hyperion. Marcus Milton was sent to Earth 13,034 as a baby from a dying world of Eternals, where he was raised by a human father who taught him the morals of society. When he grew up, he became the superhero known as Hyperion and joined the super team Squadron Supreme. When his universe and another were colliding, Hyperion tried to prevent his universe's destruction, but failed and was left floating in nothingness until AIM scientists on Earth 616 pulled him into their reality and took him prisoner. He was eventually freed by the Avengers, who he then joined. Hyperion is a ripoff of Superman, whose powers come from the sun. As such, he has a very similar power set, being nearly invulnerable, having super strength, speed, stamina, and the ability to fly and shoot atomic energy from his eyes. Like Superman, he has to be extremely cautious due to his amazing strength, as he could easily destroy the planet if he lets loose too much. Unlike Superman, he has cut loose in a violent way before, such as when he plucked Atlantis from the sea and threw it to the ground, thus destroying it. But he felt bad later, so it's okay. Number 7, Captain Marvel. Carol Danvers is the half-human, half-Kree warrior who joined the Air Force before joining NASA. She discovered her powers and became a superhero, operating under various different aliases such as Miss Marvel, Binary, and Warbird, before eventually taking up the mantle of her dead love, Captain Marvel. She is an extremely powerful hero who has been a member of the Avengers, Avengers, an honorary X-Man, a Starjammer, and the leader of the Alpha Flight space program. Captain Marvel has all the classic powers such as super strength, durability, and flight, but also has a few extra ones, such as the ability to shoot photon beams and the ability to transmute matter in order to reshape it into anything she wants. She is yet another example of a hero so powerful that they have to be sure to restrain themselves in order to not accidentally kill everyone on the planet. Number 6, Rogue. Perhaps the most obvious choice for a spot on this list, and one that it's frankly kind of embarrassing none of us thought to put in any of the previous 3 videos on this subject, is Rogue. Anna Marie has the mutant power to absorb people's energies through touch, which temporarily grants her their abilities, powers, and memories, and causes her victims to be weakened. She once attacked Carol Danvers, and as a result, permanently ended up with her powers of super strength and flight. She started out as a member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants before eventually joining the X-Men. Although her powers can be useful in a combat setting, it can really mess with your personal life when you can't touch anyone you care about without hurting them. So, most of the time, Rogue holds back her powers by wearing gloves for the safety of those around her. Number 5, Storm. Aurora Monroe is descended from a long line of African priestesses who all have white hair and the potential to use magic. Her mother was a princess who married an American photojournalist and moved with him to Manhattan, where Storm was born. They moved to Cairo when she was 6 months old, but when she was 5, her parents were killed, leaving her an orphan. She lived as a thief for a while before eventually making her way to Kenya, where her weather-controlling powers made her be worshipped as a goddess. She is connected to Earth's weather patterns, and as a result, her emotions can result in unstable weather. If she gets mad, she could start a tornado, for example. Therefore, she has to be careful to keep her powers in check, lest she accidentally cause a natural disaster. Following the death of Wolverine, Storm had Beast take her into space so she could safely vent her emotions, and she still ended up igniting Earth's atmosphere, causing an aurora borealis effect across the entire planet. Number 4, Ghost Rider. Johnny Blaze is a motorcycle stuntman who, in an effort to save his surrogate father, Crash Simpson, from dying of cancer, made a deal with the demon Mephisto. Mephisto promised to cure Crash's cancer in exchange for Johnny's service. Unfortunately, Crash perished in a stunt gone wrong almost immediately afterwards, and Johnny became Ghost Rider, becoming bound to the spirit of vengeance, Zarathos. When transformed into the Rider, he has super strength, is essentially immune to damage, and can manipulate hellfire. Perhaps most iconic is his penance stare, which causes its victims to experience every bit of pain that they have ever inflicted on other people, resulting in guilt, pain, and trauma. Ghost Rider is extremely powerful, but Zarathos tends to want to go really all out on his quest for vengeance, and Johnny often has to hold him back to prevent him from going too far. Number 3, Iceman. Bobby Drake is a mutant whose powers were first revealed when he was attacked by a group of school bullies and he was forced to freeze their leader into a block of ice. An angry mob showed up at his home planning to execute Bobby, but he was saved by Cyclops and Professor X, and he was invited to join the X-Men. His powers include the ability to become organic ice. He can also generate ice, snow, and cold temperature using the moisture in the air. This is actually more powerful than you might initially think, allowing Bobby to freeze the Earth in Astonishing X-Men Volume 3, number 64. He is an Omega-level mutant who holds back from using the full extent of his powers as he fears that he could be dangerous. Professor X once said that Iceman has the potential to destroy the planet if he's not careful, and for a time, Bobby was known to wear a special power belt which helped him keep his powers under control. Number 2, the Human Torch. When Johnny Storm was exposed to cosmic rays while on a space exploration mission with his sister Sue, Reed Richards, and Ben Grimm, he was transformed into the Human Torch, and the group became Marvel's first family, the Fantastic Four. As the Human Torch, Johnny is capable of controlling ambient heat and transforming into a fiery plasma. He can sculpt and throw flames with his pyrokinesis and is able to fly. Most relevant to this list is his Nova Flame, which happens when the torch reaches his hottest temperature and expels it 900 feet around him at a temperature of 1,000,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This makes him about as hot as a nuclear warhead, and if he did this in a populated area, it could result in several deaths. He has stated that this power has the ability to destroy a small moon. He also has to hold back so that he doesn't burn up the Earth's atmosphere, killing everyone on the planet. Number 1. Supergirl. Kara Zor-El is Superman's cousin. When the planet Krypton was destroyed, Kara's home, Argo City, was spared thanks to the efforts of her father. Although, due to radiation, the city was slowly turning to kryptonite. When the city was deemed past the point of no return, her father pulled a page out of his brother's book and built a rocket, sending Kara to Earth. She became Supergirl, and was placed in an orphanage by Superman as part of her cover, although she was eventually adopted by the Danvers family. Supergirl has all of the same powers as Superman, such as flight, super strength, speed, hearing, invulnerability, as well as X-ray and heat vision. As someone with the same powers as Superman, Supergirl has to hold back when she fights villains, or even just interacts with people in general, in order to make sure that she doesn't reduce anyone she comes into contact with into a fine red mist. She is slightly less powerful than her cousin, but there was a period where she became a member of the Red Lantern Corps, giving her both the powers of a Kryptonian and a lantern to try and have to control.
Number 10. Cyclops. While Cyclops might not be as powerful as some of the others on this list, he pretty much perfectly sums up the idea of a hero who has to hold back his power in order to fight. I mean, that's literally what his costume is for, really. Well, other than that sweet X-Men suit. That is just so we know what team he's fighting alongside. But when it comes to his visor, that is straight up being used to better control and restrain his powers, so that he isn't just optic blasting everyone he looks at or comes up against into next week. Additionally, Cyclops doesn't just use his visor, but also uses his gloves to do this. In his gloves are little buttons that Cyclops can basically push to control the visor, allowing him to open it more or less and change the angle at which it will emit his optic blasts. This is also why Cyclops is known as a master of trigonometry. He needs this knowledge so that he can best utilize his optic blasts, knowing exactly how and when to fire them, and with how much intensity in order to achieve whatever the fight calls for. So whether it's a giant full frontal blast or something a little bit more subtle, Cyclops is always prepared for each and every occasion, as long as he has his trig knowledge intact and his visor and his gloves with him. Since the character first debuted, his powers and their immense strength are something that have also been shown as bothering and plaguing this character, with him even believing that Jean could actually never love him because of his uncontrollable optic blasts. How could she ever love me? I have to wear rose quartz glasses all the time. It's not that big of a deal, psych. Just chill. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that like button? Number 9. Starfire. Starfire is a character who is immensely powerful, and honestly, we don't talk about her enough on this channel. It's been a minute since we talked about Corey, but let's get into it. The Teen Titans in general are an immensely powerful team, and now that they're no longer teens and are fully grown adults, being known simply as the Titans, they're even more powerful than they once were. Being in control of superpowers as an adult superhero is really, I think, all about knowing when to hold back. Over time, characters have a tendency to only get more powerful and more experienced with age, and Starfire is no exception. In the comics, even pre-Flashpoint Starfire in a fight against Blackfire acknowledges that she is indeed her sister's equal in terms of her power and prowess, saying that the only reason that she has not beaten her sister is because they have never fought as equals, despite being equal to one another. And her sister responds by saying that due to Starfire's caring nature, Corey often holds back, which is basically her weakness. At least, that's how Blackfire sees it. While Blackfire might see this as a weakness, I'm sure Starfire would actually see it as a strength, as it is also what makes her a hero. Sometimes in order to be a hero, you have to know when to restrain yourself, you know what I mean? Number 8. Gentle. Gentle is such a great mutant hero, one we honestly do not talk enough about. His power is so great that it's believed using it could actually result in him losing his life. As a result, Gentle was given vibranium tattoos, which allow him to better contain and control his powers. His powers grant him augmented strength. Despite his mutant name, Gentle can actually become insanely muscular, increasing in size and mass, and we don't actually know the limits of his powers yet, which is why they're also so dangerous. Using them is also really hard on Nesno's body, which could result in his death. Gentle is a hero who, while also a citizen of Krakoa now, is also known for his Wakandan heritage, being actually part Wakandan and part Russian based on his parents' heritage. Initially, it was believed that using his power also caused him great pain and actually resulted in seizures, but we later learned that this was actually more psychological. The vibranium tattoos were therefore helpful for him in regards to using his powers, but were also helpful in the way that they seemed to help lessen his pain. Gentle was also recently a candidate for the X-Men, and one of the mutants you could vote to have elected to the team. He didn't get chosen, but I honestly hope he does get to join the main team in the future, as he's a really neat and unique hero and character. Number 7. The Flash. The Flash might seem like a weird pick for this list, especially as up to this point we've mostly been focusing on characters who have something physical or mental that forces them to hold back their power set. But with the Flash, it's actually all about how powerful he is. He is, I would say, too powerful, which is the issue, especially in regards to his ability to time travel. While Barry Allen as the Flash has traveled back in time and changed things only to learn afterwards of how this was kind of an awful mistake, upturning the entire universe as a result of the change he'd made to basically save his mother, Wally West has seemingly learned from his predecessor's mistakes. For that reason, Wally actually prefers not to get involved when it comes to time travel. He knows that to do so could possibly break the universe, and so has a tendency to be more reserved and much more careful when it comes to racing through the time stream. And even when his friend Hunter Zolomon had begged Wally to use his power to help reverse his paralysis by traveling back in time to prevent it, Wally actually refused. This is what prompted Hunter to become the villain known as Zoom, believing that Wally simply wouldn't help him because he'd just not known enough tragedy in his life, as Hunter had. Zoom believed that in order to make Wally as the Flash a better hero, he would actually have to make him suffer. Number 6. Hellstrom. Hellstrom is actually someone who is similar to another character on this list in regards to his heritage, although the other character I'm comparing him to here is actually not from Marvel, but stay tuned for more on them. Because this point is all about Damon Hellstrom, or Hellstorm, depending on his persona and his mood. Hellstrom is said to be the son of Satan, although it is unknown up to this point if his father is really the true devil or just one of the many demons posing as the devil in the Marvel Universe, including Damon's father, as well as Azazel, who is Nightcrawler's father, and Mephisto, who isn't really known for being a father, but did once have a son named Blackheart. That is a thing that happened, and Blackheart did try to usurp him, so, you know. Hellstrom, as such, has two different personas within him, one that is inherently more good and heroic, and another that is straight up or on the verge of being evil, more influenced by his father's heritage. Sometimes these two personas are kind of given different names as well, Hellstrom or Hellstorm depending on which persona he is leaning more towards at the time. Sometimes Hellstrom is actually only spelled with one L, and other times he's used these names to sort of like protect his identity, although they are both super similar, so I don't really fully understand how that's supposed to fool anyone. Hellstrom has often struggled with unleashing the full force of his power, and sometimes, in fact I would say often, regrets its ties to hell and the darkness that lies within him. Number 5. Shazam. Shazam, or Captain Marvel as some still refer to him today, is one of the most powerful heroes DC has, and in fact some would argue that when it comes to his fights and contests with Superman, it is he, not Superman, who is often the one who would need to hold back. This is because Shazam's powers come from the gods, and some actually say this is because his powers are kinda magical. The limitless wisdom of Solomon, the strength of Hercules, stamina of Atlas, power and omnipotence of Zeus, courage of Achilles, and speed of Mercury. There is really no limit, or there shouldn't be, to what he can do, and it is because of this sheer power and strength that Shazam often needs to hold back when fighting against his enemies as well. You could also add in the fact that it is Billy Batson's kind heart that often encourages him to hold back against his enemies, preferring to not be so brutal with his enemies or his opponents. I mean, especially if they are his friends or people he looks up to, because, you know, even heroes sometimes fight each other, like in a fight against Supes. At one point, Superman even played host to Captain Marvel and actually marveled at his sheer power. So, you know you're probably going to need to hold back when you're like wowing Superman with your power levels. Number 4. Blue Marvel. If you are powerful enough to knock out Hulk and live to tell the tale, even if he possibly is maybe a less stronger version of the Hulk from the Ultimate Universe, then you probably need to rein in your powers almost all the time. Blue Marvel's powers come from him being a scientist and being forever changed by an experiment gone wrong. Adam Brashear was the project lead on an experimental attempt to manipulate and utilize antimatter. When the negative reactor exploded, It transformed Adam into, in essence, what he was trying to create. He became an antimatter reactor, harnessing antimatter, which basically powered his amazing newfound abilities. Number 3. Superman. I mean, Superman is one of the strongest superheroes DC has to offer. He packs a mean punch, and I mean a mean punch. He often holds back, and not just in regards to strength and holding back actual force, but also in terms of his morality. Superman has a very strong moral code. He won't even hit someone in the back if their back is turned to him. That's how passionate he is about fighting fair. He doesn't hit his opponents when they're down, and he doesn't kill, even though he could very easily permanently defeat his opponents by just straight up ending them. This just isn't Superman's style, and honestly, it's what most people love and respect about Superman. To use his power to annihilate his opponents would actually kind of be sinking to their level. In fact, in realities where he has chosen not to hold back, like in Justice, where he brutally murders the Joker in response to him destroying Metropolis, killing his BFF Jimmy Olsen, and manipulating Superman into killing Lois, Clark becomes a straight up villain and a brutal dictator, which is why he chooses to hold back more often than not in the comics, because he is aware of how power can easily corrupt people. I mean, to be honest, a lot of his villains are people who allow themselves to become corrupted by great power, whether or not they're aware of that. Number 2. Hulk. To say that the Hulk is the strongest there is really not an overstatement. Not only the strongest, but also just one of the most indestructible heroes out there. After all, Hulk is also now immortal, and kinda has been the whole time. And as a result of this, is a character that you do not want to face in a fight. The good news is that Hulk typically doesn't want to kill people, and so he generally does hold back in fights, unless he's going up against someone, you know, that's just about as indestructible as he is. Like, he might not hold back as much when he's fighting someone like the Thing. There are a few reasons that this happens when it comes to Hulk holding back. One, Hulk has actually exhibited he himself has morals. Not all Hulk personas are like this. I mean, look at his alternate version, Maestro, from the future. This version of the Hulk is more devoid of morals and is therefore willing to use all of his strength and power to devastating degrees. The other reason Hulk is often holding back actually has to do with the other persona that's in there with him at the time, Bruce Banner. It's been alluded to before that Bruce can act at times like the Hulk's conscience, but then again, it's also been suggested that Hulk actually might be Bruce's conscience, so kinda depends on the story you're reading as to who is the more heroic between those two personas. Number 1. Raven. Raven is another character that basically sums up the idea of a person who has to hold back and really has no choice in that matter. I mean, we've seen what happens when Raven fully lets go, and it's deadly. Raven in general has to hold back her power in regards to letting herself be fueled by emotion, which is why she generally remains extremely detached. Which also makes her a great counterbalance to someone like Starfire on the Teen Titans team. While Starfire's issue when it comes to holding back is that she has too much emotion, too much empathy for those around her, Raven often prefers to stay closed off from those emotions, knowing that with them could come great power, but at the risk of easily losing control. This is a huge issue for Raven considering her heritage. Raven is related to the demon Trigon, who is immensely powerful and is a version of Satan in essence in the DC universe. While Trigon is her father, he is also her arch nemesis, which means she has to be careful when it comes to possibly opening herself up to his influence at all, as it can and has in the past turned Raven into an extremely dangerous and powerful supervillain. One that could like literally end worlds, so yeah.
And at number 10 is Red Hood. Now look, technically, things have changed for Red Hood recently as he has finally agreed to take a less lethal approach to crime fighting, which is why he is at the top of this list. But even though he doesn't bring people to the end of the line anymore, he still leaves them on the brink of the afterlife, and it's debatable whether that is actually necessary all of the time. But outside of his recent developments, Red Hood is an incredibly lethal hero, with almost no qualms about taking the lives of the criminals he faces. And that will be a running theme for pretty much all the heroes on this list. Jason Todd began his time as the replacement Robin, but he had nothing new to offer other than being a bit rebellious, so you guys, the fans, got him savagely taken down by the Joker. Good job. It's actually kind of funny though, because when DC brought him back as the Red Hood, everyone absolutely loved him. Now, he's the black sheep of the Bat family, wielding his dual blam blams and constantly going out of his way to subvert the patriarch of that costume family by going far above and beyond the necessary limits. And at number 9 is Rocket. Icon is quite possibly one of the strongest Superman-like characters in DC Comics, and he is, in my opinion, kinda way cooler. But Icon would have never become Icon if it wasn't for Raquel Irvin, a teenage girl who inspired Augustus Freeman IV to use his alien powers to become a hero. And while she had no natural powers of her own, she used an alien-created inertia belt to let her manipulate kinetic energy and to stand by his side as his sidekick, dubbing herself Rocket. As the human sidekick to an incredibly powerful alien superhero, Rocket needs to bring all the power she's got just to keep up. But on the side of being a superhero, Raquel is also an amateur writer, a high school student, and a single teen mom, all while living in the poorest crime-ridden neighborhood in Dakota, Paris Island. She does all that and has the power to punch dudes through brick walls. There was even a time that she absorbed the kinetic energy of falling out of a plane and used it to completely destroy a whole building in one punch. So now you know I wasn't joking about her giving it her all. Number 8, Rocket Raccoon. From one rocket to another rocket. Only this rocket wields absolutely massive out-of-this-world weapons and is a 4-foot tall raccoon with exceptional tactical skill and a pretty creative potty mouth. Rocket the Raccoon has had a fairly messed up past, which I think is a common thread for heroes who don't really hold back. It gives them a bit of a cynical view of the world, most likely. Now Rocket comes from Half-World in the Keystone Quadrant star system. Here, a group of aliens built a massive insane asylum, which then had its funding cut, so they abandoned the project but left the patients with robot stewards to watch over them. Now these robot stewards became sentient thanks to a supernova, and so they genetically engineered the animal companions of these patients to do the job that they were supposed to do, providing them with tons of equipment, weapons, and toy parts. Now this is where Rocket comes from. Eventually, he went off Half-World and became an incredibly adept bounty hunter with Groot, and eventually joined the Guardians of the Galaxy when Peter Quill put them together to face the Phalanx invasion. Being a little tiny raccoon means Rocket has got to compensate, and he does that by being exceedingly good at his job and going completely all out on his enemies. In at number 7, Ghostmaker. In the same vein as Red Hood, Minoka Khan, or Ghostmaker, is another Batman adjacent hero with absolutely zero issue with using his katanas, or pretty much anything he can find, to usher criminals into the underworld. The difference here is that Ghostmaker is practically on the same level of proficiency as Batman himself. Bruce Wayne and Khan have trained under many of the same mentors and at the same time, being rivals since they were in their teens. Where Batman sees crime fighting as a duty that he needs to perform, Ghostmaker sees it as an art, and this difference has caused them to go head to head on multiple occasions and eventually led them to vowing to just stay the heck out of each other's way. As Ghostmaker sees this as an art, he never holds back because he's constantly trying to one-up both himself and everyone else, and I mean honestly, he's really freaking good at it. He has even gone into Gotham to clean up the messes that Batman couldn't handle, which is a controversial statement to make, but we can talk about that in the comments down below. Also, Ghostmaker is kind of hilarious. If you want to know what I mean, go read the comics where he is put in charge of Batman Incorporated. He's ruthless. And at number 6 is Hawkeye. Hawkeye makes this list for a very good reason. He fights alongside the Avengers, the world's mightiest heroes, and as Jeremy Renner made note of in Avengers Age of Ultron, he is a guy with a bow and an arrow. Hawkeye needs to constantly perform at the peak of his game and keep himself in peak physical condition just to keep up with his allies. And all the heroes want him on their side because they know he does actually deliver on that. But that's alongside the fact that he is constantly dealing with angry exes. Also, Hawkeye was originally and occasionally an assassin. Not holding back is part of his job description, which is why he was tasked by Bruce Banner with completely assassinating the guy while he was the Hulk by flinging an arrow into his eyeball. Sure, he felt incredibly guilty for this, but Hawkeye, an incredibly capable human, was the one who actually took the life of the Hulk. You can't do that and be holding back. And at number 5 is Moon Knight. Before Mark Spector ever became Moon Knight, he was already not entirely a great person. He was shady for sure, as he was part of the CIA, but also put himself in illegal fights and weapon smuggling schemes, and he was even put on on trial for taking out the president of a South American country. He worked as a mercenary, and it was one of the few heroic acts that he did, protecting an archaeologist's daughter, that got him mortally wounded and then revived by the ancient Egyptian god Khonshu in exchange for his servitude. Now, as the Fist of Khonshu, Mark would beat down criminals in the middle of the night while also living 3 other lives with separate personalities. Even though Mark is an Avenger, he consistently takes on his hero work by himself and constantly goes all out on the criminals he finds. Now, due to his split personalities, it's a little difficult for anyone, even himself, to say what he's actually capable of. Where one personality would never do something, another would do absolutely anything. And then there's also the influence of Khonshu that has made Mark abandon people to go and fight whatever battle Khonshu needs him for. Like when Moon Knight needed to fight the Hell Lord Mephisto when he wanted to take over the world. This street level hero took on a Hell Lord. You see what I'm saying here? But more than that, Moon Knight has been able to actually beat all the Avengers and has even been infused with the Phoenix Force. There's a reason that he's one of my favorite superheroes. Number 4, Midnighter. For Midnighter, the thing that makes me say he doesn't hold back is his use of his survival implants. These implants let Midnighter completely and flawlessly regenerate from any injury and give him a super enhanced immune system, which has allowed the guy to fight with a broken neck and other broken bones, actual holes in his chest, and while being set completely on fire. Not to mention he's fought after contracting pretty damaging viruses, including AIDS. He can also do this because one of his other implants allows him to turn his pain receptors completely off, allowing him to fight when the pain of his injuries would stop a normal person. It's also meant that he's been able to be completely awake and alert while he was undergoing major surgery, and that's pretty intense. The last of his implants grants him environmental adaptation, which allows him to survive self-sufficiently and without sustenance for indefinite periods of time in places like the vacuum of space. Now take all that and grant it to a guy who has absolutely no issue turning criminals into a bloody pulp, and you've got a recipe for someone who never holds back. And at number 3 is Superior Spider-Man. Now, while it is totally true that Spider-Man himself is known to hold back his power and pull his punches, because, you know, greater power, yada yada, great responsibility, that thing, this was not the case when his body was taken over by one of his greatest villains, Dr. Octopus. When Doc took over the body of Peter Parker, he unsurprisingly was not only unaware of the amount of strength Peter actually had, but he was also, unsurprisingly, morally ambiguous with his use of that power. What do I mean by that? Well, the Superior Spider-Man is pretty well remembered for a little thing that happened when he fought against Scorpion and completely punched the villain's jaw clean off of his face, ending his life instantly. There was also the time he went up against Jester and Screwball, 2 unpowered villains who commit crimes just for the thrill of it. For these 2 villains, Spider-Ock, or Spock here, used his fist to turn them into unconscious bloody messes. Spock also led an army of henchmen against Kingpin's base of operations and completely leveled it to the ground, completely destroyed the robot body of the Spider Slayer and then mocks him, and he also completely knocked out Wolverine in just 2 hits for touching him. Hilarious. And at number 2 is Wolverine. If Andrew was here right now, he could probably go on a rant about how Wolverine notoriously, consistently chooses the path of most resistance simply to show how tough he is. And yeah, the guy has an adamantium skeleton, one of the strongest healing factors in comic books, and his powers can't exactly get out of control, so he has almost no reason to hold back at all. He is well known for being one of the wildest, most ferocious fighters in the Marvel landscape. No one wants to face this guy, as almost completely guaranteed to end in their loss, if not their certain demise. In the Age of Ultron story, for example, his very first solution to solve the problem of Ultron was to just go back in time and end Hank Pym's life before he could create the insane robot, which actually would result in a much worse timeline. Or there's Old Man Logan, when the villains coordinated an attack against the heroes and Wolverine thought he completely decimated a large group of villains when he actually took out every single one of the X-Men. The villains took advantage of the fact that Wolverine doesn't hold back to make him destroy his own teammates. It's a well-known fact that James Howlett very rarely holds back. And in at number 1 is the Punisher. I don't even really need to explain this one. Punisher is like the black sheep among all the heroes and even the anti-heroes. He very much toes the line of being a complete villain. Sure, his targets are almost always criminals and villains, but sometimes they haven't been at all. Frank Castle took the life of Captain America as an example. He's famously the Marvel Universe, and he did that while having the same handicap that Hawkeye possesses, the fact that he's just a guy with an absolutely insane arsenal that he is not even slightly afraid to use. And if he ain't using his weapons, then he will use whatever else he has, including his own fists. There was even a time that Frank Castle in the 616 continuity used a steamroller to completely crush and flatten Wolverine in an incredibly overly aggressive comic. What am I saying? Almost every comic with Frank Castle in it is overly aggressive. During Civil War, Frank instantly ended the lives of two villains who were on his side as soon as he saw them. He doesn't hold back ever.